Yeah, and it is turning out to be a feel-good kind of Thursday. Now, from the first time when we heard the pride chant of "We're here, we're queer, we will not live in fear," issues around being in the LGBT plus community have become more prominent in the public eye, from TV shows like Queer Eye and Pose to celebrity children not being afraid to announce that they're transgender. And most recently, Zaya Wade, daughter of former NBA player Dwayne Wade. Now, with Pride Week recently having taken place, we're asking the question, what's the best way to help our children come out? And so this morning, we're joined by an expert panel consisting of clinical psychologist Karen Lee Masters, sexologist and clinical social worker Ron Adenal, as well as the executive director of Gender Dynamics, Liberty Matesa, to help us discuss this hot topic. And of course, we'd love to hear your questions and your comments as well. So head on over to our Facebook page, Expresso Morning Show, SABC3. Drop a comment in the post, and we would love to engage with you. And our guests have also found new favorites in our Frenchies as well, who've given them a furry welcome. Morning.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. I mean, you know, the LGBT plus community has gained prominence, I think, since the 60s. It's not a matter of like gaining popularity or anything like that, but it became less taboo as the years went by. What do you think the strides that the community took over the years to be where we are today?
I think there's been a gradual awareness that's growing globally. In the States, in Europe, in South Africa, in Africa, people are becoming much more aware of the LGBTQ community and acceptance of that we are all different and that it's not just a binary of you're either heterosexual or you're homosexual. And even for a long time, homosexuality was regarded as a mental disorder in the DSM, which is the Bible for psychiatrists. So we've taken great strides since then, including in South Africa, but it's still going slow. But I always say we need to celebrate the little steps that everyone is taking. There's much more outspokenness about it. People are coming out of the closet. And I think also, thanks to social media, the space is already out there. And people are saying, I can speak and I can show myself as I am, authentically. And I'm not agreeing with these two extremes that our sexuality is on a continuum from heterosexual to homosexual, and we're all in between there. And what the world has been saying under the conservative kind of colonialist Western ideas is that you either this or you that.
Choose.
You must choose, that's it. Finish klar, you know?
And Ron, if I could throw the next question then at you, that, you know, for a lot of us, the understanding of what it means to be part of the LGBT plus community comes in your adult life. But as I said earlier on, Zaya Wade, for instance, came out publicly on social media, supported very well, of course, by mother and father Dwayne Wade and Gabrielle Union. How much support are we offering to children and to adolescents to understand what it means to be part of the LGBT plus community?
Well, in the South African context, it has grown exponentially, especially with children and adolescents, I'd say in the last 5 or so years. But at the same time, I'm going to talk about the positive, but I must always qualify it. What I'm going to share is also localized in very specific parts of the country. I think we need to celebrate the gains, as Karen is saying, and I mean, we have a wonderful liberal constitution. A lot of things have developed, including in South Africa, but I think we always have to remind ourselves, because the assumption is we're a liberal country. We're a country with a very liberal constitution, and we have pockets where liberal mindsets exist. And those become places and spaces where trans children and adolescents and gay and lesbian and pansexual, there's a whole spectrum of orientations and gender identities we understand now, where they can come out. But South Africa, as a society across our cultures, you know, we're a culture, religious, rich country. And so a lot of conservatism and a lot of ignorance actually also still exists.
Absolutely.
So I think the point I want to make is in many spaces, young people still struggle to come out, and it's not safe to come out in certain environments. But that said, I think we've made, in Cape Town, we often refer to Cape Town as almost kind of the Mecca when it comes to the services that do exist. So we have organizations like Gender Dynamics, and Liberty will speak to that as the director. There's Triangle Project in Cape Town. We have the clinic at Groote Schuur Hospital, at Red Cross Children's Hospital. We have a unit for transgender children and adolescents. So in the kind of the cosmopolitan environments,
Yes.
services exist where children can get support and guidance, and we work with, whenever you're working with children and adolescents, you're always working with the family. So it has grown, but there's still a lot of work
to
that
be
needs
done.
to be done.
You know, I love the fact that you've touched on the structures put in place. I think globally, I think it was the president of Russia who said that they want to ban the marriage of, you know, homosexual couples. For me, in 2020, that's just mind-boggling. But then Liberty, he touched a little bit on the structures put in place in cosmopolitan spaces such as Cape Town. What other structures are put in place for adolescents or children who want to come out, as to say?
I think it's a very important consideration to touch on how do we understand LGBTI communities. I think oftentimes we conflate sexual orientation with gender identity, and that becomes a big problem in the communities in terms of how services then translate in different ways to different communities in the context of having dignity respected. So perhaps just to get a distinction between the two, that sexual orientation in itself is who you are attracted to. Gender identity is your sense of who you are in gender terms as an individual. And of course, gender expression is somewhat different to that. The work of Gender Dynamics is to look at gender identity and gender expression more specifically, and how we can cater towards ensuring that the structures exist, whether it is legal structures in the sense of laws and policies that are enabling for trans and gender diverse persons within the healthcare system, within law, to be able to get your gender marker change, because it's also a very bureaucratic process at the moment. Looking at education in particular, and that is a space in which transgender children spends most of their free time, being able to participate within the education program. However, the system in itself does not understand. So we're looking at it from the context of what does the curriculum need to embody in order to teach about gender diversity in its more broader sense, to make a trans child feel safe and feel secure within the classroom. At the same time, what is the school system in itself embodying to ensure that there's safe spaces outside of the classroom? So when children play on the playground, or when they participate within sporting codes, how are those inclusive and reflective of trans and gender diversity? So those would be some of the structures that I think would be very valuable to trans and gender diverse children that are very marginalized in being able to create safety in that particular regard. We touched on healthcare as well, in terms of what is the appropriate age for a trans child to get access to healthcare and affirm themselves. I think we'll talk a little bit about that during the course of the interview.
All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us, and we will continue this conversation very shortly. And the big question we're asking, what's the best way to help our children come out? And we'd love to hear your questions and your comments for our expert panel. So head on over to our Facebook page, drop a comment on the post, and we would love to engage with you shortly. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back.
It's my feel-good breakfast show.
Welcome back to your Feel Good Breakfast show. It is a Thursday. It's a beautiful Thursday. Klein Vrydag, as we would say. We're talking all things relationship, and today we are joined by a panel of experts, clinical psychologist and sexologist, and also clinical social worker and the executive director of Gender Dynamics, Liberty. They are joining us to help us discuss what needs to be considered if a younger family member comes out to you as a non-heterosexual or gender non-conforming person. We'd love to hear your questions and comments, so head on over to our Facebook page and drop a comment on this post, and we will definitely engage with you.
Absolutely. And thank you very much once again to our panel for being here. Liberty, if I could throw the first question of this segment to you, and let's talk about terminology, because I think early on you mentioned even just two things that need to be understood in terms of what one's identity is, how you identify yourself, and what one's sexual attraction preference is. Those are two very important distinctions that need to be made. What are the other terminologies that need to be widespread in terms of them being part of our knowledge base as a community in order to help support the LGBT plus movement?
I think what we find useful as an organization is, of course, being able to outline what it means to be lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, intersex. And of course, these are not mutually exclusive terminologies. They actually intersect with one another because every person has a sexual orientation and a gender identity and a way of expressing that gender identity. So we make reference to those labels and being able to articulate what that means. What is also very helpful is having an understanding of what our Constitution says and what our human rights are, to be able to get an understanding across to people that these are not people who identify as LGBTI, are not people that just fell miraculously out of the sky. We have existed forever. And so making reference to a human rights framework, such as our Constitution, the Bill of Rights becomes important in being able to champion our issues. But I think it's a very broad and expansive lexicon that we can go into, but for the purposes of keeping it very crisp, LGBTI in that particular sense would be
Okay,
important.
maybe just add something to that. I think an important shift that happened recently is that we need to understand we need to move beyond the binary. So that if I can just speak to that. So we know that there are sexual orientations, but there's more than being homosexual or heterosexual, because that creates a binary, like there's two choices. And when it comes to gender identity, you're either cisgender or you're transgender. And what we know today is there's a continuum of sexual orientations: pansexual, asexual, omnisexual, bisexual, polysexual. So it's no longer a binary. When it comes to gender identity, there are multiple gender identities, being agender, being bigender, and the entire spectrum. And that is an important shift. There aren't two boxes to be ticked. There is diversity,
a large spectrum.
and we all fall somewhere on that spectrum.
exactly.
And I find in the South African society, that's the struggle. People can still kind of get okay, you're either the one or the other, but the moment you let them know there is this plethora and this continuum, that I still find parents and South African society still struggles to grasp.
Life is not about absolutes, you know.
Absolutely.
There's definitely like a spectrum of emotions that we go through, and at different phases of our lives, we identify with different things, but we never really understand that. But Ron, now this discussion has become more prominent, especially on social media after Dwayne Wade and Gabrielle Union's daughter came out as transgender. What do you think those conversations happening at the top affect us here at the bottom for people who don't have access to those kinds of structures and support?
So I think the positive influence is absolute. Visibility is essential. Being represented is essential. And I think when celebrities and their families are, because they're the ones that make it into the newspapers and onto the screens, and we have to acknowledge the power of their platforms. So I think in that sense, it's exceptionally positive. I mean, we have Charlize Theron as well, and Angelina Jolie. So there's been a number of celebrities whose children have come out as trans and have been spoken about. So I think that significantly contributes to a collective awareness and a consciousness. It gets conversations going. It ends up, you know, in shows like this, and which then kind of the broader society has access to. So I think it's very powerful in creating awareness and consciousness. But at the same time, I will say as well, it also creates anxiety. So often after these kinds of shows that I've participated in, there's sometimes a lot of anxiety and feedback, and you know, parents asking a lot of concerning questions. And in our context, you know, when it comes to cultural and religious beliefs, this might trigger, you know, in our country in particular, I've seen that. But the services have evolved, so maybe I need to speak to that. So as a trans child today, we follow the WPATH standards of care, the World Professional Association of Transgender Health. And we are already, and I've been involved over 5 years now with trans children that are coming out at the age of 3, 4, they're in primary school, they're in high school. And we're now at least at a point in time where standards of care exist, where an appropriately assessed transgender child, it is recommended that they socially transition. So I'm often involved, and gender dynamics and other professionals support us in negotiating the social transition of learners in primary schools, where we go in, we educate the parents, we educate the teachers, we speak to the school management, so that our trans kids can live their true, authentic selves in the school environment, which is such an important, powerfully socializing space, where the trans girl can just be one of the girls and the trans boy can be one of the boys. Yes, it does trigger things like who can play what sport and what bathroom to use. There's always those challenges, but they can be dealt with.
Sure. All right. Any last words, Karen Lee?
I just want to say it made me think about what I read about earlier, just in researching for this program. There was a lot of debate around, are children ready to make that kind of decision at 3 or 7 or 10 or whatever age prior to reaching a consenting age of 18 or 21. And the debate goes on, and some researchers say, absolutely, a child feels a certain way. They don't identify with the gender that they've been given at birth. And they start to feel a different feeling, and their parents, this is what happened with Zaya Wade. Her dad saying, Dwayne saying that he started to see that she was feeling a certain way and behaving a certain way that was different to the gender that she was ascribed. And they just watched this unfolding. So others are saying, yeah, it was imposed upon her because her parents are celebrities and they wanted to ride on this wave and make their names kind of bigger and more out there. But I don't know. I mean, how do we know that? How can we say that for sure? What if a child does feel at the age of 3 or 7 or 10 that they are not identifying with the gender that they've been ascribed to at birth?
Well, clearly, still lots to be understood and to be talked about on public spaces and in public forums such as this one. And in fact, to quote Zaya Wade's parents, they said, quote, "A lot of people are wondering who they could have been had their parents supported who they are. Identity isn't a desire or a wish. It's more a matter of understanding and making the necessary adjustments to ensure someone is being celebrated for being their authentic and true selves." Wow, and with that in mind, if you are seeking more information, you are most welcome to send an email to info@genderdynamics.org.za. And to our panel, Ron, Liberty, Karen Lee, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you.